He thought things couldn't get any worse. But just when people lose hope, he found something that made his heart beat faster. Is he ready to trade his freedom for feelings he's been afraid of for so long? I had always thought of prisons as something distant, something that happened to other people. Criminals in headlines, mugshots on television, faces I could forget as soon as the news moved on. I never imagined I would end up here myself, shackled, silent, and shoved toward a life I had never prepared for. The moment the gates closed behind me, the sound was like a verdict that echoed straight into my chest. Steel and concrete, heavy and final, as if the world I once knew had been sealed off forever. Fear came first, fast and suffocating. It wrapped around my lungs, forcing me to breathe shallowly. Shame wasn't far behind. Shame burned deeper, heavier, because I knew everyone who had once trusted me, everyone who had believed in me, would never look at me the same way again. I felt their judgment even though they weren't here, my family, my friends, the people who had smiled politely when my name was mentioned. Now, in their minds, my name would mean something dirty, something broken. Inside, I kept my head low. The corridors were loud, filled with metal doors slamming, boots scraping against the floor, guards shouting orders that snapped like whips. My body reacted before my mind did. I flinched at every sudden noise, braced at every new voice. I didn't belong here, and everyone could see it. I could feel their eyes on me, stripping away any last fragment of dignity I carried. Loneliness struck harder than I had expected. It wasn't just the absence of familiar faces. It was the crushing realization that I had been cut out of the world I once knew. I couldn't call anyone. I couldn't walk away. The silence of my own isolation was louder than the chaos around me. It told me I had no one. It told me I was no one. And yet, as I tried to blend into the background, as I tried to walk with small steps and invisible shoulders, I saw him. He was standing near the far wall, as if he owned the ground beneath his boots. He didn't speak, not at first. He didn't need to. The air around him was different, as though the others had unconsciously given him space. It wasn't announced, it wasn't explained, it simply was. He radiated something I couldn't name, something that made the loudest inmates lower their voices when he passed. Carter. I didn't know his name then, but I knew he mattered. My eyes landed on him for a second too long. His gaze met mine, steady and sharp, and the world around me seemed to still. It wasn't a glance I could shrug off. It was direct, deliberate, and filled with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He wasn't looking at me like the others, hungry, mocking, or curious. He was looking at me like he knew something, like he had already decided what I was. Fear spiked inside me, but mixed with it was something else, something I didn't want to admit. In that stare, I felt a strange thread of security, as though if he chose to, he could shield me from all the eyes waiting to devour me. But that comfort came laced with danger, because it was clear whatever safety he offered would not come for free. I looked away quickly, but it was too late. That moment was already carved into me. The guards barked orders, herded me and the others in a line, stripped me of everything I owned. My belt, my shoes, even the watch my father had given me on my graduation. One by one, my last ties to the outside world were taken and replaced with rough fabric that smelled faintly of disinfectant. I felt hollow, reduced to a number, a body in a system that didn't care if I broke. But no matter where I turned, I knew he was there. Carter didn't follow me, not physically. He didn't need to. His presence pressed on me like a weight, even when he wasn't near. It was in the way people glanced at him and then at me, as though they knew something I didn't. It was in the silence that fell when he shifted his stance. Fear, loneliness, shame, they were still there, but now they were tangled with something new. A sense that I had been noticed. Claimed, perhaps. I didn't understand it, but I felt it in my bones. As the hours dragged into the night, I lay awake on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling that seemed to press down closer with every breath. The noises of the prison drifted through the walls. Footsteps, distant laughter, the metallic groan of doors opening and closing. But beneath it all, louder than anything else, was the memory of his eyes. The calm certainty, the silent dominance, and that strange, unshakable promise hidden in his gaze. Carter, a stranger, a threat, a mystery, and a man who, for reasons I couldn't yet name, made me feel that my story here was only just beginning. The days inside began to blur into one another, each hour chained to the next, each moment weighed down with the same dull heaviness. I woke to the clang of doors, the shuffle of feet in the corridor, the sharp commands of guards echoing against the concrete walls. The food was tasteless, the air thick with sweat and cleaning chemicals, the silence between shouts more threatening than the noise itself. I told myself I could survive if I kept my head low, if I avoided attention, if I became invisible. But invisibility is not something you can control in a place where every move is observed, where weakness is smelled like blood and water. It was in one of those moments, when I was closest to breaking, that Carter appeared again. I had been carrying my tray across the cafeteria, eyes fixed on the floor, trying to move without catching anyone's gaze. A sudden shove from behind sent the tray tilting, food splattering across the linoleum. Laughter rippled through the room, sharp and cutting, and I felt heat crawl up my neck. My hands trembled as I bent to gather the mess. But before I could move, a voice cut through the noise. Low, firm, steady. Enough. I froze. The laughter died at once. The man who had pushed me stepped back, his smirk faltering as Carter's shadow stretched across the floor. Carter didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply looked at the man, and the air grew heavy with unspoken threat. The bully muttered something under his breath and slunk away, leaving me kneeling among the scattered scraps of food. My heart pounded as I stared at the floor, afraid to lift my head. Then I felt it, a hand, not grabbing, not forcing, but steady against my shoulder. Carter leaned down slightly, his words measured and unhurried. You shouldn't walk alone. I nodded without thinking, the truth of his warning burning into me. I wanted to say I could handle myself, that I didn't need anyone. But the lie tasted bitter even before it left my mouth, and Carter's silence told me he had seen right through me. He released my shoulder and walked away, and the space he left behind felt larger than the room itself. From that moment, I noticed him more, or perhaps he allowed me to notice him. He was never far, though he never hovered. Sometimes he leaned against a wall in the yard, his eyes scanning the crowd with a calm vigilance. Sometimes he sat in the corner of the common room, a book in his hand, though I doubted he was reading. His presence was a quiet anchor, a force that steadied the ground beneath me even when everything else threatened to crumble. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself I was imagining it. But each time someone tried to corner me, each time a whisper curled too close to my ear, Carter appeared. He never struck, never shouted. He didn't need to. His silence carried more weight than fists. One glance from him, and men twice his size retreated. It unsettled me. It provoked me, because protection was never free in this place. Every inmate knew that. Safety came with a price, and the price was always control. Yet Carter never asked for anything. He didn't demand favors, didn't order me to run errands, didn't trade his shield for cigarettes or privileges. Instead, he watched. He measured me with those dark, steady eyes, as if he were assembling a puzzle no one else could see. And with every passing day, I felt the invisible thread between us tightening. It was late one evening, the yard bathed in the orange light of a setting sun, when I finally found the courage to speak to him. I was sitting alone on a cracked bench, my thoughts tangled, when his shadow fell across the concrete. You sit like that, people will think you're waiting for something, he said, his voice even, almost casual. I looked up. I'm not hiding. His lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper. Everyone hides. Some just pretend better than others. The word struck me harder than I expected. I wanted to ask him why he kept watching me, why he had stepped in that first day, why he seemed to care. But the question stuck in my throat. Instead, I nodded, my silence betraying me. Over the following weeks, the bond grew stronger, though it was never named. He offered no explanations, no declarations. But I felt in the way he glanced toward me when the hall grew too quiet, in the way he shifted his position to block a hostile gaze, in the way he leaned just close enough for me to hear his words when no one else could. I began to sense that to Carter, I was not just another inmate. I didn't know what I was, not yet, whether I was a responsibility, a curiosity, or something more dangerous. But I was something, and in a place where most men were reduced to nothing, that meant everything. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, replaying every word he had spoken to me. I told myself it was gratitude, nothing more, that I clung to him only because he gave me safety, because without him I would have been swallowed whole by the system. But deep inside, I felt a gnawing question I couldn't answer. Why me? Out of all the people here, why had he chosen me? And then came the moment that shattered any illusion I had of coincidence. I had been cornered in the laundry room by a pair of inmates who smelled weakness like wolves scenting blood. Their words were quiet, mocking, designed to press me into panic. I felt my chest tighten, the walls shrinking in, until suddenly they both froze. Carter's shadow filled the doorway, his posture calm, his eyes steady. He didn't speak immediately, letting the silence suffocate the room before he finally said, "Find another target." They obeyed. No argument, no bravado, just obedience. And then he looked at me, his gaze pinning me where I stood. "You can't keep walking blind. Learn, or you'll break." The warning stung, but beneath it was something else, something almost protective, almost personal. That night, lying awake, I realized the truth that scared me more than anything else. I had become someone to him. I didn't know if that meant safety or danger. I didn't know if it meant friendship or something far deeper. But I felt it in my bones. Carter had chosen me, and I couldn't decide whether that was the beginning of my salvation or the start of a new kind of captivity. Every day inside those walls felt like a test I had not studied for, a test where the questions changed constantly, and failure was punished not with a grade, but with survival itself. The routines became familiar: count, meal, yard, silence. But familiarity never meant comfort. It only meant I had memorized the rhythm of fear. Yet within that rhythm, within that repetition of harsh commands and wary glances, something else began to take root inside me. Something that unsettled me far more than the prison itself. It was Carter. Always Carter. He appeared in moments I wanted to vanish, in spaces where I thought no one noticed me. He carried with him a quiet dominance that bent the air around him. He didn't need to speak to be heard. He didn't need to act to be felt. His presence alone was enough to shift the balance of every room, every corridor, every yard where men measured themselves against one another. And somehow, that presence had turned toward me. I told myself it was just circumstance, a coincidence. He saw a new inmate struggling and decided, for whatever reason, to step in. That was all, nothing more. But the more I tried to believe it, the less convincing it sounded. Because he didn't do this for anyone else. He didn't shadow anyone else's steps or cut short the threats aimed at them. His eyes didn't linger on others the way they lingered on me. That realization should have been reassuring. It should have made me feel safe. Instead, it twisted into a new kind of fear because I didn't know why. At night, when the cells fell into uneasy quiet, I would lie awake, staring into the dark, and hear voices that weren't really there. My mother's voice, tight with disappointment. My father's silence, heavier than any words could have been. I remembered the way friends had looked at me when my name first appeared in the news, not with outrage, not even with pity, but with a careful distance, as though standing too close would stain them. I thought of the way society marks you, not with ink or shackles, but with something colder, the refusal to forget, the refusal to forgive. And against all of that, against the weight of shame and judgment, there was Carter's voice. Low, even, certain, the way he told me not to walk alone, the way he warned me to learn, or I would break, the way he cut through the noise of a room with a single word. And in that word, I heard something I hadn't known I was searching for: assurance. It terrified me. Because what did it mean that I clung to the sound of his voice? What did it mean that I carried the memory of his eyes into my dreams, that I felt steadier in his presence than I ever had outside these walls? I had never allowed myself to feel that warmth before. never admitted to myself that I wanted it. And now here, in the ugliest place I had ever known, it was pressing against me with a force I couldn't ignore. Every glance became charged, every silence a question I couldn't answer. When his eyes found mine across the yard, I felt the heat climb up my neck, the same heat I had once felt under my family's disapproval, but different, sharper, hungrier. It was not shame, though shame came quickly after. It was something far more dangerous. I began to dread his nearness as much as I craved it. Walking into the cafeteria, I felt his gaze before I saw him. Sitting in the common room, I sensed the weight of his presence like a hand at the back of my neck. Even when he didn't approach, even when he let the silence stretch, I felt tethered to him. And it pulled me in two directions at once, towards safety and towards something deeper that I didn't dare name. Doubts gnawed at me constantly. What if I was only fooling myself? What if all of this, his protection, his silence, his watchful eyes, was just a strategy, another form of control, another prison inside the one I already lived in? I asked myself that question again and again, and each time I found no answer, only the echo of my own uncertainty. But then came moments that broke through the doubt. A word spoken only to me, a nod across the room, the faintest trace of softness in his expression when the world wasn't watching. Brief, fleeting glimpses of something that made my chest tighten and my breath falter. And in those moments, the fear and shame cracked open just enough to let the warmth flood through. I hated it. I needed it. I thought of the life I had left outside, of the expectations I had lived under, the silent rules I had never dared to challenge. The way my family had drawn invisible lines around me. Lines I had stayed within because stepping outside meant losing their love. Or maybe their love had always been conditional, waiting for me to fail. I thought of the people who had turned their backs when I needed them most, people who couldn't bear to see me fall, because it forced them to admit they could fall too. And then I thought of Carter, who didn't turn away, who didn't flinch when others did, who looked at me with an intensity that felt less like judgment and more like possession, as if he saw not who I had been, not who the world said I was, but something else entirely. That was the root of the struggle tearing me apart. On one side, the weight of the world I'd left behind, the shame that whispered I would never be enough, never be forgiven, never be whole. On the other side, the dangerous warmth I felt in Carter's presence, a warmth that threatened to strip away every lie I had told myself about who I was and what I wanted. I lay awake night after night, caught between those two forces, unable to choose, unable to escape. Part of me longed to surrender, to let the warmth take me, to stop fighting myself. Another part recoiled, terrified of what it would mean, of what it would cost. The battle raged inside me, silent but merciless. And as much as I tried to bury it, to smother it under fear and shame, I knew the truth. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about me, about whether I would keep hiding behind the expectations of a world that had already condemned me, or whether I would step into the fire of what I felt, no matter how much it burned. And the cruelest part was this. Every time Carter's eyes found mine, I felt the decision drawing closer, a decision I wasn't ready to make, a decision that would change me forever. The prison had its own way of announcing new arrivals. You didn't need to hear the guards shouting or see the paperwork passed around. You felt it ripple through the corridors like a change in the weather. The rhythm of the yard shifted, the glances sharpened, conversations cut short, and suddenly everyone seemed to be waiting, watching, measuring the new blood. The day he arrived, I felt the tension before I even saw his face. He was loud, brash, his voice carrying too easily across the cafeteria, his laughter pitched just high enough to demand attention. Some men arrived cautious, hiding behind silence, trying not to draw fire. Not him. He wanted to make a mark from the first step he took inside, and I knew instantly that trouble had followed him through those gates. I tried to avoid his eyes, to keep myself small, but invisibility was a gift I had long since lost. My connection to Carter, unspoken as it was, had already painted a target across my back. People noticed. People whispered. They saw the way Carter's shadow fell across my path, The way he stood, just close enough to turn threats into silence. That protection marked me as untouchable in some ways, but it also made me a challenge for those too reckless or too foolish to understand the rules. It happened in the yard, under the pale sun that barely warmed the cracked concrete. I had been sitting on a bench, trying to look occupied without drawing attention, when his voice cut across the air. "Well, look at this. Pretty boy's got himself a guardian angel." The words landed like a stone thrown into still water, and every ripple carried toward me. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The men nearby leaned back, not eager to be caught in the blast. My throat tightened, but I kept my eyes down, hoping silence would make me disappear. He didn't stop. He circled closer, his smirk sharp, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "What's the secret, huh? What's he see in you? Because I don't see anything worth protecting." The heat of humiliation crawled across my skin, as if each word peeled away the thin armor I had built. My chest ached with the weight of all the eyes pressing down on me. I wanted to run, to vanish into the walls, but there was nowhere to go. And then, before I could even form a response, before the silence crushed me completely, Carter was there. He didn't rush. He didn't push. He simply appeared, his steps unhurried, his expression unreadable. The air shifted the way it always did when he walked into a space, and the yard seemed to lean toward him, waiting. He stopped at my side, not touching, not even looking at me, but close enough that the distance between us carried meaning. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but cut sharper than any shout. "He's mine." Just 2 words, nothing more. The new inmate's smirk faltered. His eyes darted between us, as if searching for some hidden weakness, some crack in Carter's certainty. He found none. Carter didn't move, didn't blink, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority radiated from him in a way that required no explanation. The silence stretched, and in that silence, the challenge collapsed. The man muttered something under his breath, feigned a laugh that carried no weight, and stepped back. A predator testing prey, only to realize the prey was guarded by something far more dangerous. The yard slowly exhaled, conversations resuming, footsteps scraping against concrete, but the moment hung between us like smoke that refused to clear. I sat frozen, my heart hammering, the echo of Carter's words replaying again and again in my mind. He's mine. Not just a warning, not just protection, a claim. For everyone else, it was enough to settle the matter. But for me, it raised questions I could no longer ignore. When the yard thinned out, when the weight of other eyes shifted elsewhere, Carter finally looked at me. His gaze was steady, but in that steadiness I saw something I had never seen before, a flicker. Small, brief, but undeniable. It wasn't anger. It wasn't dominance. It was something closer to fear. Not fear of the new inmate. Not fear of confrontation. Carter wasn't afraid of men like that. He had proved it countless times. No, this fear was different. It was directed inward, as if for a moment the certainty he carried cracked open, and beneath it was the possibility of losing something he couldn't bear to lose. Me. The thought landed like a blow. It should have felt empowering. It should have reassured me. Instead, it unsettled me more than the insult ever had. Because if even Carter, the man who carried himself like the rules bent around him, could fear losing me, then what did that mean about the bond between us? What did that make me? That night, the cell was colder than usual. I lay on the thin mattress, my body still tense, my mind replaying every second. The insult, the silence, the words Carter had spoken, the flicker in his eyes. My chest ached with confusion, with questions that spun faster than I could catch them. Was I a burden to him? A responsibility? Or was I something far more dangerous to us both? Someone he cared about in a place where caring was weakness? The more I thought about it, the clearer one truth became. The balance had shifted. It wasn't just me tethered to him. He was tethered to me as well. And that realization terrified me more than anything else. Because now I wasn't only fighting my own fear, my own shame, my own doubts. Now I carried the weight of his fear too. And in a world built on power and survival, That was a kind of betrayal neither of us had prepared for. The choice loomed over me, heavy and relentless. To embrace the bond meant stepping into a fire that could consume us both. To reject it meant tearing away the one thing that had given me strength in this place. Either way, the decision was coming. And when it did, nothing about who I was or who Carter was would ever be the same. The news arrived without warning, slipped into my life like a whisper I wasn't ready to hear. A lawyer's name, a signature, a decision made in an office far from these walls. Early release. The word struck me harder than any insult or threat ever had. I should have felt relief. Joy. The weight of possibility pressing against my chest, promising air and sky and a world beyond concrete and steel. But what I felt first was fear. Not fear of freedom itself. Not fear of the unknown life that waited beyond the gates. I was afraid of what freedom meant here, now, with Carter's shadow cast across every thought I carried. Because freedom meant leaving him. Freedom meant tearing apart the bond that had grown, quiet and relentless, in the cracks of this prison. And I didn't know if I was strong enough to cut that tether. The days that followed were a haze. Men whispered when they passed me, their glances heavy with curiosity. They knew. News traveled fast in places like this, faster than air itself. Some looked at me with envy, others with contempt, as if my release was an insult to their endless time. I ignored them all. My mind was too full, my chest too heavy. Carter said nothing at first. He watched me the way he always had, steady, unreadable, his presence constant. But I could feel the shift in him, the quiet storm behind his calm. His eyes followed me longer, his silences grew thicker, and when he stood beside me, it was closer than before, as though he was measuring the distance that would soon stretch into a gulf. One evening, as the sun dragged shadows across the yard, he finally spoke. His voice was low, almost reluctant. You got the notice. It wasn't a question. He already knew. Yes. My own voice cracked under the weight of the word. He studied me for a long time, his gaze heavy, deliberate. Then he said, slowly, then you have a choice. Take it and walk out, or stay. Stay. The word echoed in me like a challenge, like a temptation I hadn't known I wanted. Freedom or him. Life beyond these walls, or the bond that had grown inside them. I swallowed hard, my throat burning. And if I go? His jaw tightened. For the first time since I had known him, I saw the mask slip. The faintest flicker of something raw passed through his eyes. Fear, longing, maybe both. Then you leave me behind. The words cut deeper than I was ready for. I wanted to speak, to ask why, to demand an explanation for everything he had done, everything he had been to me. But my tongue felt heavy, chained by all the unspoken things between us. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the thin mattress, my eyes tracing cracks in the ceiling, and felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Freedom. The word glittered like a promise, but it was hollow without him. And yet, staying meant surrendering to a bond that had grown dangerous, consuming, a bond that might save me or destroy me entirely. When morning came, I walked through the corridors with my belongings folded neatly in a box, my heart hammering with every step. The gates loomed ahead, massive and unyielding, the very same gates that had closed behind me what felt like a lifetime ago. My legs trembled, not from fear of what lay beyond, but from the pull of what I was leaving behind. And then I saw him. Carter stood waiting, arms crossed, his posture steady, his face carved into neutrality. But his eyes, those eyes I'd come to fear and crave, were fixed on me with a weight that pinned me in place. Go, he said softly, almost gently. My throat closed. I don't know if I can. He stepped closer, the air shifting with his presence. His voice dropped, quiet enough that only I could hear. Then don't. Stay if you want, but know what it means, and know what it will cost. The choice pressed harder than iron. Behind him lay the world I had built in his shadow, protection, intensity, the dangerous comfort of his claim. Beyond the gate lay freedom, uncertain and fragile, but mine. I stared at him, memorizing every line of his face, every flicker of restraint in his eyes. He was a storm wrapped in silence, a fortress built of dominance and fear. But beneath it all, I had seen the truth. He wasn't untouchable. He wasn't invincible. He was human, and he was afraid of losing me. That truth nearly broke me. With trembling hands, I turned toward the gate. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though chains still bound me, not to the prison but to him. The guard spoke, doors creaked, paperwork shuffled, but it was all drowned out by the pounding of my heart. I walked forward, out into the pale light of morning, and behind me, the gate slammed shut. Freedom. The word no longer felt hollow. It felt sharp, raw, and real. Because I walked out not as the man who had entered those walls, but as someone changed, someone carved open by fear, shame, and something more dangerous, love. I had left Carter behind, but I carried him with me. In every thought, in every heartbeat, in every memory of the eyes that had seen me when no one else would. I carried the claim he had made, not as a chain, but as a scar, a reminder that I had once belonged to someone who forced me to see myself. And in that, there was both loss and something bittersweet. Because I knew now that I would never again betray myself. Never again let the world's judgment strip me of who I was. Never again let anyone take away the right to love. I had chosen freedom, but freedom was not an escape. It was a promise, and I intended to keep it.